We'll introduce Cris Mazza for y'all. And so we'll hear from both of our readers tonight. And then at the end, we'll have a brief time for a Q&A. Earlier, we had questions about publications. Tonight, if you've got questions about writing, about our writers' work, stick around for the end. That's always a fun part of the reading. Alex, great to see you. Take it away.
Thanks, Ted. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Oh, good. All right, great. How many of you have read Cris Mazza's short stories at Sexual Harassment yet? Show of hands? Yeah, a few. Good. Well, I'll describe it a little in case you haven't, or in case it's been a while. It's about a male restaurant floor captain and a female waiter whose accounts of various allegations are unnervingly divergent. The very structure of the short story makes the reader shoulder the anxiety of judgment by setting their points of view in columns side by side. So first you have to figure out how even to read it. And some readers will take the first thread all the way and then go back and read the second one, and others will bounce or leapfrog back and forth between them. And then you have to somehow weigh the unequal presentations. The man's is not only privileged by its position on the left, it actually starts a couple of pages before the second column comes in at all, and then it gets the last word too. Plus his is relayed by an unnamed narrator speaking about him in the third person, supplying context about his professionalism and his happy family life, whereas the woman's point of view is a raw and unsupported kind of first person. In many ways, the woman seems the aggressor, if not outright dangerous, yet there are areas in which we may end up trusting her account more, in which she quotes him damningly and his account seems deliberately vague. Gina Frangelo, in her insightful introduction to Cris Mazza's new and selected story collection, Charlatan, writes, "One of the disturbing aspects of Mazza's work is her continual exploration of the lines between victimhood, personal accountability, and provocation. Her feminism resists easy roles and especially binaries of victim and perpetrator, bucking against both the infantilization of women and the reduction of male desire and aggression. What is clear in almost all Cris Mazza's fiction is that there is more than one truth in any story." Cris Mazza is the author of 18 works of fiction and literary nonfiction, and is a winner of the Penn Nelson Algren Award. And we're keeping these Zoom introductions brief, so I'll give you a very quick whirlwind tour. The New York Times Book Review hailed the stories of her first collection, Animal Acts, as remarkable for the force and freedom of their imaginative style. About her first novel, How to Leave the Country, the Los Angeles Times raved, "Talent jumps off her like an overcharge of electricity." She soon began editing volumes in addition to writing. Her chicklet anthologies of what was for a time termed post-feminist fiction touched such a nerve that they came up in congressional obscenity hearings and have since endured. The Wall Street Journal described the stories in her collection, Is It Sexual Harassment Yet?, as literary sitcoms from hell, and said of her, Ms. Mazza is a subversive anarchist writer, hardly forgettable." And being termed a subversive anarchist by the Wall Street Journal, I think that's a badge of honor. Her novel, Dog People, which showcases the deep knowledge of canines she's gained from her side passion as a dog trainer, to quote Library Journal, demonstrates that the reciprocal capacity for devotion between dogs and humans is at least as powerful as the most self-serving and venal human motives. About her novel Homeland, Donna Seaman in Booklist writes, "Mazza's mythic and mesmerizing tale charts the cruel paradoxes inherent in migrant workers' lives." Her most recent book before the one just out is a memoir, Something Wrong with Her. In it, Mazza breaks taboos around talking about anorgasmia and her relation to asexuality and gender identity. The book was the inspiration for a film, which is actually a kind of auto-fictional sequel of the book called Anorgasmia, and features Cris Mazza herself in pseudo-documentary fashion. Her new novel, Yet to Come, draws on this recent autobiographical material in surprising and unexpected ways. Its protagonist, Cal, has never stopped loving a woman who retreated from him long ago. Now locked in a relationship with an abusive partner, he struggles to maintain a space for love and imagination, and perhaps a new understanding of his past and himself. In the words of one reviewer, it echoes back through Mazza's oeuvre as it expands and illustrates the depth that was always there. Rick Moody, quoting a fictional, duly certified cultural evaluator of Mazza's work in his playful foreword to her selected stories, writes, Cris Mazza is an American original. Hers is a vital, engaged, imaginative presence in American letters. She's also been an inspiring and committed teacher to me and many other writers, and her writing workshops were some of the most important ones for me personally in my own development. So this makes it even more my great honor and pleasure to introduce her. So please, if you can, with unmuted applause, let's welcome Cris Mazza.
Thank you, Alex. Wow, that was amazing, and you know, a triple treat to hear from your very first PhD student and see you in your profession like this. Also, the introduction you gave to my current book. Can everybody hear me, by the way? Okay, the introduction you gave to my current book is great, because as I was telling Ted Sanders' class this week, they had read the book far more recently than I had. I was supposed to be talking about this book last fall during my book tour that didn't happen, and instead of talking about it last fall, I didn't even think about it. And so thanks to Ted Sanders' class for helping me to remember what it was about, and to Alex's introduction as well. I won't even have to introduce it at all. I gave this excerpt a title that doesn't appear in the book, though, and it might say a lot. The title of this excerpt is Didn't Say No. The brass guy in a band he played with had a friend out in the Imperial Valley, the fucking pointless desert in El Centro, with a 5-piece jazz combo. The desert guy's sax player was quitting and moving, probably moving and therefore quitting. It was a difficult place to decide to continue living. Cal started filling in at the jazz combo's gigs, driving 2 hours each way from San Diego. But the trumpet player in El Centro also owned a music store, offered Cal a job there so he could stop the driving. Plus, the store's instrument technician was a retiring band teacher, would stay another year and teach Cal basic wind instrument repair. It could be a life. By 1983, he'd been full-time in the Imperial Valley for almost 2 years, and not alone. The woman he brought with him had 2 kids. One, mercifully, a boy in high school, a year remaining, then the Army. The girl turning 11. The woman with the kids was someone who just started hanging around at his gigs in San Diego the last 6 months before he made the move. She was a friend of the band's brother, sister singers, started hanging around him, made it easy. Or better put, he just didn't say no. 1996. Like the wedding season, the holidays provided multiple gigs. Companies from a law office to the whole hospital having parties. These were the gigs he brought Virginia to. But he hadn't seen the restroom altercation, only heard of it later from the drummer, whose wife was in a toilet stall during all or most of it. So it went from the drummer's wife to drummer, from drummer to Cal, and who knows who else. Apparently, Virginia followed a woman into the restroom and confronted her, told her to stay away from Cal. The parts Cal didn't know, what did the woman say when challenged with this kind of possible threat? Was there a threat included? Who was the woman? What had she actually been doing? Possible guesses for the latter two. She'd been dancing at the party, perhaps dancing alone or in a group of women, and she was somehow familiar to Virginia, perhaps a parent of a student or former student. Cal couldn't remember seeing anyone dancing who he might have thought to say hello to later at the gig. He wasn't even sure which gig it was. He called the drummer a few days later to try to find out a little more. The drummer didn't have any new specifics, just she said it got pretty hot. Virginia was pretty excited, and she didn't want to come out of the stall while they were going at it, but couldn't answer when Cal asked if both women had raised their voices or was it mostly one who was going at it. And by it, did that mean some pushing and shoving or worse? I don't think it was an all-out catfight, if that's what you mean, just, you know how Virginia can get, said as though Cal needed to be reminded of what everyone else knew. 1997. A very rare occasion out to Saturday lunch with the guys without wives. Cal tried to say what guys say when they're out with the guys without wives. Why do women whine, "You never make love to me," after they've spent all day bitching your ass out? He didn't notice at first that the guys' laughter was tinged with discomfort, with knowing more than they wanted to know. Two other members of Blue Sand had been in the store, one to drop off the lights he'd brought home from the last gig, the other already there to give Saturday morning keyboard lessons. A local school band director brought 2 clarinets and a saxophone for repair. Cliff and Cal in their early 40s, the insurance salesman keyboard player closer to 50, the band director had to be somewhere between. He'd been teaching longer than the 15 plus years Cal had been in the frickin' valley working at the store, still the only music store in a town with a prison, but no university, a comedy club, but no live theater, a weekly outdoor farmers market, but no natural food store. Now there were 4 high schools, 6 trade technical schools, a Home Depot, Costco, and Walmart, but still only 1 bookstore, and that was mostly magazines and cards, hanging on because the stationery store had gone out of business. No botanical garden or art museum, but 2 dirt car racing tracks. No Volvo dealer or Thai restaurant, but 3 bowling alleys and a firing range. A stop on the professional rodeo circuit, but no ice rink or dog shows. A community choir, community orchestra, and 1 semi-pro, if pocket change made them pros, jazz combo with Cal on sax, but dozens of country bands, metal bands, and hundreds of mariachi bands. A town on the wrong side of the Southern California mountains from where he had grown up and gone to college, only 100 miles away from here, and long before he was married. Somehow, Virginia already knew about the lunch. Dinner wasn't cooking when he got home at 6. He put his bag down in the dark, clean kitchen and went down the hall to the bedroom where she was on the bed in the dark. At least not in bed, as she'd been for weeks after Angel died. He didn't turn the light on. Not feeling well? You know how I'm feeling. Sad, I guess. Betrayed, more like it. Cal felt in his pocket for his cigarettes, but they were out in the car. As though he'd asked what she meant, she said, "You can go out to eat with the guys, but never with your wife." "Okay, come on, pick some place to go tonight." She wouldn't pick, and in fact didn't answer. So when she finally got off the bed, put on her shoes, and picked up her purse, he took her to Denny's because she liked their pies. She ordered a Cobb salad. "Hope you're leaving room for pie," he said. "Oh, are we here just for dessert? Did you eat your all-important man meal with the dudes? And of course, dudes don't eat rubbage. You need rubbage in your diet. Here." And off she went, each remark punctuated by a piece of lettuce thrown across the table at him. He would rather have fun with anyone but her. The other guys' wives were probably there. He must have taken someone else. She knew he was seeing someone. Did he know what it was like to be the only one trying to have a marriage? The Lord was going to pay him back for what he's done to her. The last piece of lettuce hit his head as he bent to take a bite of meatloaf. It stuck to his scalp and he had to peel it off. 1999. Two things happened before he quit playing in Blue Sand. He would have quit anyway after the first thing. The second thing just happened to come later in the day after the first thing, and before Cal had a chance to tell Cliff to find a new sax player. They had a New Year's gig in the mountains. The drummer had a little place in Pine Valley and had booked them at a local bar and grill December 31st, 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. He invited everyone in the band and spouses to stay at his place afterwards so they could feel free to imbibe at the gig. 3 of the guys, Cal included, accepted the invitation. So with the drummer and his wife, that made 6 people in the cabin and 2 in a camper parked outside. The cabin had 2 bedrooms plus futon in the living room. Cal had had enough to drink during the gig that sleeping on the futon, closer to Virginia than in their bed at home, wasn't a problem. And in fact, he slept till all of the others were up and already having breakfast in the tiny kitchen on the other side of the wall from where he lay. The voices, articulated with laughter, were just a rhythm, not an unpleasant one, until Virginia riffed, "I know, so interesting to see Cal at work on the chickadees, proves what's been driving me star-craving mad." The moment of silence wasn't the group wondering if Virginia was craving stardom. Somebody mumbled something. Plates clinked. Then Virginia's voice was even louder. "I just don't understand why one of you wouldn't have told me instead of let my suspicions run wild." A chair scraped, a low voice hummed, then a softer one piped up. Virginia again. "Actually, I do know. I wish Cliff was here because it extends into the music store. Not the students themselves. I always trusted him with my daughter, but look how young their mothers are nowadays. I mean, if he's going to carry on like this, believe me, I'll throw my hat into the fire." The next silence was quickly broken by 2 female voices, but they were more likely trying to change the subject than asking Virginia if she planned to run for public office. "No, wait, really," Virginia said. "I've tried over and over, like Jesus said, to be the one to throw the first stone. I can see he's out of control now." Cal let his feet hit the floor as heavily as he could, walked deliberately down the short hall to the single bathroom, thankful for the creaky floorboards, then closed the door a little too hard, but not so it seemed like an irate slam. He stayed after peeing, fighting the need for a cigarette, the hot water feeling good on his hands. When he joined the group in the kitchen, the bass player's wife was remarking that they'd been circling the parking lot of the new Red Lobster ever since ground was broken, jonesing for soft shell crab, and they should all go to dinner when it opens. "Cal doesn't like fish," Virginia said. "They have steak and chicken. He doesn't like the smell." He would never know if they would have laughed or sat in another frozen moment, because he spoke up immediately. "But the coffee smells great. Could I get it to go? I'm sorry, I have to get rolling, but there's a shop full of horns that need to be playable by Monday." The drummer's wife got up to fill a travel mug, and all 3 guys stood and shook his hand, which itself was strange. But the pianist put his other hand on Cal's shoulder, looking into Cal's eyes, and said, "Now?" Cal knew he didn't mean, "You have to work now." When the cops got there, they found the living room furniture a little askew, the TV trays totally upended, dishes from dinner on the carpet. But in the kitchen, there was a carnage of black-eyed peas and a roast chicken on the floor, more dishes, broken ones, and the knife meant to carve the chicken standing upright, its point buried in the cutting board. They also found Cal on the front lawn, locked out of the house. The cops, male and female, took turns, one inside, one outside, asking the same questions. Are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere? Do you want her arrested? How'd she get a 200-pound man out the door against his will? I didn't fight back. Good idea. Yeah, I just went the direction she was pushing me. I knew she'd calm down. What was the fight about, sir? I won't send any more money to the kids. Your kids? They grew up with us, but hers. You could decide not to press charges, but if it got worse, you couldn't stop us from arresting her. It was just dishes, and I moved my horns down to the shop. The cops, of course, didn't understand that. He walked around the block. When he got home, the kitchen was cleaned, the garbage taken out to the cars at the side of to the cans at the side of the house. Virginia was making ice cream sundaes with root beer. He wrote a check to the almost 30-year-old slacker. Spring came in February in the lower California desert. A bird pecked at the windows of his house, sitting on the sill, tap, tap, tapping, painting the sill with purple shit. 2, 3, 4 different windows all day, rat-a-tatting. One morning, Cal was cleaning window screens because the major form of precipitation here was dust. He also washed the sills, a job not tacitly included in the screen cleaning task that had been, not so tacitly, requested of him. It would have been difficult to ignore the plum and black splats of shit and pretend the duty was complete. The screens were drying propped against the garage door, the windows cranked open, so the bird achieved its life's wish. It was finally in the house, and inside, realized this was not what it wanted at all. Cal caught the bird in a sheet, put it in a cardboard box. He drove it 20 miles away into a state park in the desert. When he opened the box, the bird, wings somewhat tattered from its hours up against the window glass, flew instantly, gone in a fluttering second, the force of its departure knocking the box out of Cal's hand. Gone so fast he could barely follow the directional line of flight, but thought perhaps it was, by accident, just fluke, the route back to town. Later, the screens back in place, the windows shut, the bird returned, tapping, not knowing why it so fixedly wanted this thing it wanted. This thing that has frayed its feathers and bewildered its instinct. This thing that upon achieving led to imprisonment, darkness, and miles of flight, only to return and want it again. He looked it up. It was a male brown-headed cowbird. Instead of spending its time with a mate, building a nest and making hundreds of trips back and forth with bugs to stuff down the pre-fledglings' throats, the male cowbird had time to spend pecking at windows because the female, producing up to a dozen eggs a season, laid them into the nests of other, usually smaller birds. Industrious sparrows, dove, towhees, catbirds. The cowbird hatchlings grew faster, frequently crowded the bio kids out of the nest, and occupied the step-parents' time and resources. Why wasn't it the duped, dutiful sparrow or dove pecking with aberrant wretchedness at his window? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe a little unmute again. Maybe I heard a few claps. Maybe we can unmute and the little round of applause for Cris. Thank you. Thanks, Cris. It was great to hear you read, and thanks for visiting class the other day. It was so great of you to come by, and the students really enjoyed having you and being able to talk to you about your work. Hopefully, we'll get to talk to you a little bit more. Next, I think Corey, you're up, and you'll introduce Christina. Great.
Thanks so much, Cris, for that wonderful reading, and again for the panel today. Cristina Pugh's Restoration was the first book of contemporary poetry that I ever purchased on my own volition. A professor recommended it during my senior year of college, and it traveled with me from Oregon to Indiana to California to here in Illinois. And during my very first move to the Midwest, I remember a humid summer evening when all of a sudden the air seemed to pulse with sound. And I heard, or it almost seemed like I saw written inside my forehead, Pugh's lines come to life as I listened to cicadas for the very first time. Their sound is metallic, as you say, a hum nearly industrial, since every noise in nature is also necessarily historical. Cicadas will forever carry a hum nearly industrial, just as the flesh of fish after bishop will always resemble packed feathers. And this is what the great poets do. They embed in us their own heightened attention. They rewire both our sight and our language, allowing us to piece the world together anew. But not many poets rewire their own sight and language as dramatically and poignantly as Cristina Pugh. Across each of her 5 books, she offers a new way of approaching the world, from the lush, sustained dream work of restoration to the exquisite, almost fragmentary attention to objects and perception, to her newest collection, Stardust Media, which offers again another thrilling aesthetic swerve. And swerve is a significant term for these new poems. Not only does Stardust Media swerve in its subject matter, becoming more porous in what Pugh invites into these poems, Flaubert and Cobain, Mitt Romney and Don Draper, Madama Butterfly and I-80, but the poems themselves enact constant swerving, associative pivots, showing how the most seemingly mundane of images, a desktop background of Big Sur, a piece of Italian graffiti, become portals. Temporal portals, sure, and geographical, but most impressively, portals that are nearly metaphysical. Stardust Media excavates the language of technology, desktops, websites, screensavers, words we now gloss over or read through with a refreshing ambivalence. And ambivalence may carry with it a connotation of tonal flatness and emotional numbness. But in these poems, it's more the swerving between registers of nostalgia and skepticism, grief and wonder, that shows how much like a palimpsest is our 21st century lexicon. Pugh makes this abundantly clear in the stunning image of watching the reflection of a pianist's hands on a shiny Steinway, how within that mirror, his hands were snowy hills that shifted in a winter sky, but lambent all over like a longed for bath. Now I was listening and watching to my seat on the diagonal so I could see precisely the thing I called the video his fingers had to feed. Listen for the gorgeous swerving of Pugh's attention, which is really a deepening, a reaching beyond the self. The beauty of the body points outside the body, Pugh writes. And I'm so grateful that we have Cristina Pugh here this evening to assist us with this crucial looking beyond. Cristina Pugh's 5th book of poems, Stardust Media, was recently awarded the Juniper Prize for Poetry and published in 2020 from University of Massachusetts Press. She is also the author of 4 previous books of poems, including Perception, published by 4-Way Books in 2017, which was named one of the best poetry books of 2017 by Chicago Review of Books, and Grains of the Voice, Northwestern University Press 2013. Her poems have appeared in The Atlantic, Poetry, Kenyon Review, Colorado Review, Yale Review, and many other publications. She has been awarded a John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship in Poetry, as well as fellowships and awards from the Poetry Society of America, the Illinois Arts Council, the Bogliasco Foundation, and others. Her critical writing about poetry and poetics has appeared in many publications, such as 20th Century Literature, the Emily Dickinson Journal, and Poetry. She is professor of English at the University of Illinois Chicago and was consulting editor at Poetry Magazine through 2020. Please join me in welcoming Christina Pugh, and maybe we can unmute here too in a welcome.
Corey, thank you so very much for that introduction. When you said Restoration was the first book of poetry you bought on your own volition, I really felt the tears come to my eyes. So thank you so much. And man, I see my friends here in this audience, and I'm looking at one right now. Dear Lisa, I love you. I love my friends who are here. Thank you for being here. And thanks so much for the University of Illinois for putting this together, and to Corey for doing so much and for that incredible introduction. I am going to start reading from this book, Stardust Media, with a poem called With a Song. There's something about music, the wish to be in the dark, like I don't know what person this voice must belong to. At times I love a secret, what shears away from intellect, intrepid horn of birdsong when you won't see or know the bird. Or sometimes I'm riding in the car on I-80, dipping my eyes into the glamour of Ohio, its red barns or white barns severally unpainted by tactile fingers of winter weather, white barns with green roofs, sky blue with white roofs. Wait, isn't sky blue brighter than any sky you really see? Can sky, you might reply, hyperbole of color, platinist Crayola blue. Would anyone trade a teal feather for a trill? The highway will line with mud and snow stripes along a fence, then apple orchards spider in the ice, a long stand of pines before the strip mall. And still from the radio, an alto, a tremble. I love not knowing who it belongs to. The next poem I'm going to read is inspired by a painting by the Italian artist Giorgio Morandi. And some of you may know his paintings. He really worked his whole life almost gathering and arranging these small ceramic vases and bottles and jars in a little apartment that he shared with his sisters in Bologna, Italy. And I had the opportunity to visit that apartment last winter. So one of the things about this book, Stardust Media, is the idea that media can be completely contemporary and up to the moment, as in things like electronic media and technology as we usually use the term, but also older, like just working with paint, something that has been done for so long. The staircase. A white jar dissolves into the whitish background that gently presses its narrow form upright. Morandi's ceramics must be manna for the eye, I think. Here, their proximity makes several forms seem melded, these jars with their wide or slender mouths. That palest trellis of the air is nearly sexual, but only if you understand sex is ephemeral as flowers, the scent of one jasmine living only for an instant, but in the mind forever. Like the ghost of the last jar, I'm almost discerning in this poignance of non-color. It's the highest step on the staircase my eye must climb, a trap door to nothingness, to sameness of aspect. My feet are pressing interminable air. And if I fall now, no one will be there to reach for me. On my table, I've planted a candlestick in dirt. Nothing's growing there but silvered form, or the mystic outline of a candle it used to hold. I'll turn it around and around until it shows me a new perspective on uselessness. So in northern Michigan, there actually is a street called Voice Road, which is perfect for poets. Poets are so interested in voice. And when I saw this street sign, I just couldn't believe it. And I knew that I had to write a poem about Voice Road. This poem also contains a line from the philosopher Martin Heidegger, Voice Road. All the kids' bodies nestled their devices, their screens as hushed as aquarium night lights. But that's not happening on Voice Road, Michigan, which ends in a field cleared by pirouetting tree trunks observed from a car. Voice is the windlass that rescues diffidence from splintering the everyday. Your voice sheltered me through sharing when I thought I didn't want to speak. And many things do happen in the wilds of northern Michigan. A new young monk lofts Christ-like in the monastery, floorboards kissing his arms and legs and cheek. Now he's risen, smiling at the hegemon holding his right hand. South of them, Petoskey stones are acting much like hieroglyphs, but short on verbiage no matter how you puzzle. And Voice Road is always there. One clear night in Arcadia, Michigan, I had a dream about a dog named Missionary. Missionary chased a ball into the river, then kicked at the constancy, the slower part of water that my dream said resisted every tremor, every arabesque. Then Heidegger or Derrida asked me to dream of Van Gogh's shoes, my husband's snowy Timberlands, kicked out the door on the nights he sells Christmas trees late into December. Under the soles slides the loneliness of the field path as evening falls, wrote Heidegger. And why should we chase a philosopher from poems if his words just lowered me hand over hand to the loneliness of work? This next poem is called Hot or Cool Media. And a lot of times when we think about different media and different ways of making art, it is a thing, I suppose, to talk about whether a medium is warmer or cooler. And so this poem starts out with, well, are you going to vote for hot or cool? I would vote for cool in the case of the color TV my father built in 1970. With a white silver knob, you needed all 5 of your fingers to pull its edges as serrated as a new quarter corn-fed. You'd have to plan your viewing at least 5 minutes in advance so the picture could warm up from gray Zen stone to pathless stripes of Via Lactae, to the dresses and slacks and polyester faces of persons finely wired for sound somewhere within those cathodes. In an interview once, I recall my artist friend seemed to speak of media as weather, said painting was warm, like video, A word not yet invented, I gather, the nights I sat too close to the screen, hoping cohered in time for the theme song set to tinkle reliably at 8. She also named a painting touching everything for Alan, which co-stars a square rumple of red satin sheets, then corners of some satin blue, 2 zooms, 1 room, 2 saturated hues. Yes, I can touch what she makes me see. And just when it tells me it's fever, I'll realize she's right, that now I have no business with chiasmus, that I won't exchange the one term for the other, as happens far too often in the hopscotch of the sonnet. The TV's cool, even white hot plasma, and when dust swirls on this laptop screen, I'll need a constellation map, preferably with holes, if I still want to read. This next poem also brings some time periods and some media together. It reaches from the middle of the Obama administration back to Jimmy Carter's administration in the 1970s, and actually to the Jimmy Carter election. It makes reference to a photographer named William Eggleston, and I was just fascinated to learn of a series that he did and to see it, in which he went to Plains, Georgia, where Jimmy Carter was from. And during that presidential election, when Carter was running, he photographed Plains, Georgia, but no people. So it was just things around, objects in the environment during the 1976 presidential election. There's also a line from W.B. Yeats from his poem Byzantium. It's the only line that rhymes in this poem, so you'll be able to recognize which one it was. And I'll just say my father had chronic leukemia, which can keep you pretty healthy seeming for a long time, even when you have a diagnosis like that. Death to America chant doesn't really mean death to America, or so the screen told us, but a flag furl presently switch-bladed into flame on the television's wildfire diagonal plane, where an effigy rippled Obama's face, his smile too big like, 40 years ago, Carter from Plains. The other day I saw William Eggleston's Plains photos, oak leaves and salt shakers, blue gingham tablecloths, sentinel things, unsnared by any rhetoric that floated, jetsam, flotsam, in the 1976 presidential election. Eggleston liked the secret life of objects, but objects are coy. Did they listen to politics? Possibly, but all they heard were sentence sounds flurrying fast over Georgia. The truth was, they didn't vote. The truth really is that I saw the TV in an oncologist's waiting room. I was sitting with the healthiest looking person in the place, who happened to be my father, who had come for his routine IVIG infusion, and who was, as it turned out, closer to death then than anyone could have guessed. The sicker people there might have died soon after too, or maybe they worsened and against all odds recovered, put their clothes back on, learned to sit upright in wheelchairs, then retake their first gloried staggering steps. Yeah, you better believe that's glory, since my dad finally rode in an ambulance to hospice in his hospital gown, and he'd never wear his own clothes again. But on that other day, in waiting room oncology, when no one could have guessed who was the patient, him or me, and the flag was absorbed in its slow burn on TV, He began to look around him with concern and murmured, "People here look pretty bad, don't they?" My empathy was roused. I considered a patient in a surgical mask and bonnet. She was watching the fire with a certain kind of rapture. It reminded her of a book she'd read called Politics and Anger. Could she recall its contents? Where did anger reside in the populace that scattered over France before Vichy? Her mind was a kaleidoscope. It half filled with sky blue glass cut blossoming, then labored to crystallize the book cover's painting. 3 men in striped suits juggling 3 balls. Prisoners? A sorry little smidgen of a dance? Or dying into a dance, an agony of trance? I was trying to inhabit her, one image at a time, descending a ladder in the deep end of a pool, and I saw the pool was only growing deeper, and wondered, is this ethical? And then silently asked my father, can't you see that you're the exception? Don't you know you're going to live forever? So this next poem makes reference to a contemporary composer, David Lang, and he has done film scores for various films, and he's just a fantastic and really interesting composer, does a lot of vocal composition. And one of his compositions is a kind of renovation of certain lines in the Book of Ruth. Whither thou goest, I will go. It's what Ruth says to her mother-in-law Naomi in the Book of Ruth. And in his rendition in the song, it's where you go, I will go. And so I'm going to read this poem. Jason, this is for you. Whither thou goest. I can't imagine lifting up a voice that didn't sound like a pebble-ridden gully, or just not seeing the double-breasted consonants 3 in a row that ruffle the ending of this poem's first sentence. The song I'm hearing now has been calmed of every archaism. Whither thou goest has become where you go. Surprisingly, I don't miss the King James aspirants that whistled in the older words. The new vowels ripple to a still water impersonal. And here I sit with strangers, our knees nearly touching. From a window at stage rear, a semi-transparent scrim illuminates the singers. The stage set is afternoon lakefront in real time. The skyline looks so small in the distance. And the window makes a margin at the bottom of the scrim, uncovering a greyhound's legs and wheels on a wheelchair. All of them aloft in the social world. It's April. But floating here near the bottom of this windowed lake, I couldn't say if they move on sand or snow. The conductor is conducting the canon in his socks, his waist long and curved with a dancer's density. All the singer's eyes are following his hands, surrendering, I want to say, before my tears begin to fall. This is how I taught myself to feel, I think, witnessing somebody else's devotion. After listening my whole life, I finally learned my wedding vows. When I married you, I repeated everything I was told to say. I meant, where you die, I will die. I'm going to read just 2 more poems. This one is called Integrity. How rapidly the Blue Ridge disappears. and soon we'll be flying through a cloud interior. We're flying in the cloud, I remember she'd say, as the plane then entered what nothingness would look like if it ever had a look. That shredding of color, long before the cloud became technology. But now I'll have to leave these low blue mountains, the ones that are never ostentatiously sublime, just inward shapes that soothe the peopled earth. The farmhouses and trees I'll also lose to our ascension before I've lost that last ocean ridge above the grass, the one that won't be asking anything for itself. It offers a translucency, always nearly mirroring the lower land it also seems to shelter. Like a gifted listener, I guess it's still too easy to ascribe such integrity to landscape. But there's also truth in it, you have to admit. And look how quickly, as if in self-chastening, that listening must fade. The last poem I'm going to read is one of the ones that Corey made reference to in her introduction when she was talking about the piano and the video. It's called I Called the Video. The Steinway on the stage was so unusually shiny. You could watch the reflection of the pianist's hands as he played a Bach chaconne. Within that mirror, his hands were snowy hills that shifted in a winter sky, but lambent all over like a longed for bath. These images presented as sounds near superscript, the numeral that sweeps your eye low to the footnote that finishes a page of information. Now I was listening and watching too, my seat on the diagonal, so I could see precisely the thing I called the video his fingers had to feed. That quick cairn of wrists before a stone toppled agilely from view. A whelk, then the white caps gleaming it ashore. His wedding ring also glazed at moments while he played. Was I the only one who saw? The only one poised to see? His hands' reflected fury was the only sexiness to ascertain. Like a girl who whirls before a glass to find the way a skirt will sculpt her moving legs in wind. Or Balanchine's serenades, a song that hardens dancers' arms aloft like trees, an arabesque branches behind the orchestral note, like instant replay, rewound unto eternity. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. That was great. How about maybe one more round of applause for both of our readers tonight, Cris and Christina. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. That was really great hearing you both read today. So we've got, I think we'll linger around a bit and hopefully take some questions that people have for either Cris or Christina or both. If you have some questions to ask, probably the best way to do it is just to digitally raise your hand. You should be able to do that under the reactions button at the bottom. You can also just sort of try to wave. I've got my gallery view on, so hopefully I'll see you. But any questions for our readers tonight? You can also type it in the chat if you don't want to hear your voice on the internet. You can type it in the chat and I'll relay it. Yeah, Corey.
Thank you both again for that wonderful reading. Christina, I want you to teach a master class on ending poems. that I just feel like every book I read, your endings are just fantastic. And I know that every poem requires something different when you're ending it, of course, but I was just curious if you have, especially in this book where you are moving a little bit more like associatively between things, what's your exit strategy? How do you get to these wonderful endings?
Oh, thanks for such a great question. And that's a tough one because, as you said, every poem is so different. I guess that would be part of what I'd say is, be able to embrace the unexpected. Sometimes you hear things like always end with an image or something like that, and sometimes that's great. But sometimes you can end with an abstraction, like I just did with the word eternity. It's just interesting that you ask that, though, because I've been thinking about that a lot. Sort of the whole question of poetic closure and elegy, and I've been teaching and thinking about, Emily Dickinson and Sharon Cameron writing about Dickinson with time and eternity. And I'm working with a graduate student who is doing something a little bit around poetic closures. And I just think that it's so interesting for poets because we have to close so often. It's almost like it's an existential closure of one thing, and then we have to open ourselves up to the next. And so I think that's part of one of the reasons that poets are often so interested in elegy, is because we're elegizing our own poems every time we close them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but just know that it's something I'm thinking a lot about these days.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Anyone else with a question for our readers tonight? Yeah, Catherine, go ahead. Catherine, are you there? Catherine A's iPad, I should say.
I'm so sorry. That was probably my puppy stepping on my iPad, but I was just going to put into the chat that statement of that an ending is elegizing a poem is a stunning statement I'll take away. So I'm going to put my hand down. I apologize for that chaotic, stuff around my iPad.
I kind of want to know now what the puppy was going to ask, but okay. Cris, Cris, were you going to ask something as well, or was that you don't have a puppy?
That was no animal but me. Yeah, thank you both. Incredible reading. A question for both of you about this term that kept coming up, voice, and the double voicedness in both of your work. Cris, obviously, in the split narrators, the dual narrators. Christina, in the lyric associativeness, but that would also range historically and philosophically. Also, you would drop into meters sometimes and sometimes not. And so I'm wondering, how do you inhabit that double voicedness and render it on the page? Is that easy for you? And this is asking as someone who only hears one voice in my head always.
Well, that's a good question, and thank you. Am I on? Okay. I'm never sure because in speaker view, I don't show up. And so I'm glad. One reason I'm really glad you asked that is because I've seen too many book reviewers who refer to voice and they only mean first person narrative when they say that. And every single piece of writing has a voice, sometimes multiple voices, regardless of whether it's in first person. So inhabiting a voice is the same thing as, it's not always the same thing as inhabiting a character. If you're using a good omniscient voice, that voice should be its own personality, its own slant, its own take on things, its own tone. But when you are inhabiting a character, whether in first or third, it's just like method acting, I suppose. You do inhabit the character, and you get a feel for the vocabulary and style, sentence structure that would be used by that character, the tone, overall tone. So, and I'm sure that it's probably a more ethereal thing in poetry. So I'd like to hear what Christina has to say.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. Yeah, that is super interesting, thinking about voices and characters. And I guess in my work, I don't do a lot of things like dramatic monologues or kind of putting voice into characters, although some poets do. I guess for me, voice, I'm interested in bringing all the different associative levels of thought and kind of linguistic texture into the poem. And so sometimes people talk about, whether the poem is something that you would encounter, say, in a conversation with a friend or talking to someone you might meet outside or something like that. I don't think my poems are doing exactly that. So it's probably a combination of a very internalized voice that seeks to layer on a lot of linguistic association, and I hope also a voice that's looking at the same time outward, towards a reader. I know that's kind of a difficult balance to achieve, but I do think, I wrote a book called Grains of the Voice. I was and continue to be very interested in just different qualities of voice, in poetry and in music and singing too. So for Roland Barthes, talking about the grain of the voice in his famous essay with that same title, it's a voice that's a little bit between music and speech. And so it's kind of that that seam between music and speech that interests me. I hope that addresses the question, Christopher. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, great question, great answers. I have to say, Chris, you know how when you get older, your brain slows down and time moves faster, like scientifically measurably. Whenever Chris asks a question, my brain feels 10 years older than it actually is. That was a great question, great answers, thanks. Wes, you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. Can you all hear me? Okay. Thank you both for that really great reading. This question is for Christina specifically, but Chris, if you have thoughts on this also, I'd be fascinated to hear. But thinking about this from a poetry point of view, Christina, you talked about how like a lot of your poems sort of focus on these like meditations on a single object, or can often like revolve around like the different elements that come to you in relation to that object. And I'm really curious how in your process you think about the connections for one object, and like what that's like for you in your process, and then in the poem deciding what connections are the ones that should stay in the poem, and what connections are most productive for that finished piece.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that probably like many people, I often don't even know specifically what the connections are until I start writing. So I may just know that I'm interested in something, or there's something that really catches my eye and my attention, but I may not know exactly why or exactly where it's going to end up, or what's going to be uncovered in it, until I start that writing process. So I'm not kind of wedded to a certain kind of faithfulness around translating objects for readers. I did a lot of critical work on ekphrasis a while ago, and that was in a critical piece. That's what I always argued against, was a sort of limb by limb kind of translation, or sort of transplanting of something like an art object into verbal form. So I always like to take off and keep, it seems like there should be enough that's sensuous from it, from the object, in order to anchor the reader to it. But then, there's a lot that can go into it through the writing process. And in terms of the second part of your question, what to keep and what to throw out, I really think that's an ear. It's really all in the ear. And so it goes poem by poem, and my ear will tell me if something is too much. If it's elaborating or embellishing a little too much, maybe that needs to get out of there to get a little more economy through, because all those things are very difficult to balance. But yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Cris?
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. Go ahead, Cris.
I don't know if I have an answer for that question. If I stayed too long on an object, I might not finish a novel.
Right.
So I don't think I have a good answer there.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions, and we've got 2 hands up, so that works out well. Samantha, go ahead.
Hi. This is a question, I guess it could be for either. I was thinking of it in relation to the story that Alex mentioned earlier, Chris's story about the sexual harassment and the 2 separate narratives running down the page, and how much that asks of the reader, like how sort of you can read it different ways and interact with it different ways. And I was wondering, in that story in particular, or just in general, when you're writing, how much you're thinking about the reader, or who you assume the reader is when you're writing, how that sort of factors into the process, and how much of the writing is just done in your own mind for yourself, and how you balance that.
Excellent question. I would say that I don't think about particular readers a lot while I'm writing. And I wrote that story so long ago, I can't really remember a lot about when I wrote it. I can remember some about when I wrote it, because my feelings about the man and the woman shifted while I was writing it. And I remember that. But other than, I might think about the reader when I'm revising. There are certain things that I know I have to, it's hard to say this sort of thing, teach the reader how to read it, is what we sometimes say in workshop. And that just means, for example, in my new novel, I had a series of dialogues between Cal and the girl that he hasn't seen in years and decades. And of course, he's having those dialogues in his head without her. She's not really contributing. He's making both sides of the dialogue. And so when I first started doing those, I had to provide enough information that the reader would know that's what I was doing. And then I dropped the information as I went on, and just trusted that the reader would follow and know what the pattern was. But other than that, I don't really think about any particular readers, or worry. I really don't worry about whether the reader will, quote unquote, get what I want them to get, because I am really delighted by the kinds of things people say about my work that point things out to me that I might have never intended, and are so astonishingly wonderful. I practically can't take credit for them. So I do like to listen to people's responses without worrying about whether it was what I intended.
Yeah, good question, good answer. Yeah, you never know who's going to show up or what they're going to think. That's maybe kind of the point of art, right? And then last question for tonight, Maddie, how are you? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I was thinking of two questions because I had one for both Christina and Cris, but if there's not time, I'll just stick to one. So Christina, I wanted to talk about Stardust Media with you because I just read the entire collection for class last week, and I was really interested about, there was a lot of like references and like allusions to a lot of different things like nature, technology, certain like 18th century painters, musical artists, stuff like that. And there was a really large amount of it, which I was really interested about how you sort of chose, like where you found inspiration to include those specific things and how you managed to do that in an accurate way, because I've never been able to really do things like that before in my poetry. So I'm really interested about how you did that, because I thought that it was really unique and added a lot to all of the pieces. So I'm just curious where your inspiration was for all of those.
Thank you. So I think, you know, the inspiration has come from different places. There's sort of a moment in the book that has a lot of Italian-inspired poems in it. It's kind of near the center of the book. I was in northern Italy for about a month at a residency during 2016, and so you know a lot of that came from just getting to know and experiencing just all of the things around, and just kind of being in that environment and being open to all the wonder of everything that was around and new, and you know the art and so on and so forth. You know, I think another part of it is that you know I started life as a literary critic, and so my brain has already been for a while, you know, kind of stuffed with ideas. And one of the things that I wanted to do in my work, and that I always try to do, is to be able to make some of that stuff lyric, to be able to get music out of, you know, people like Heidegger, or whoever. That's kind of one of my overarching goals in the work I do. You see sometimes people working with ideas in poems, but it becomes very flat. And for me, it's like all the stuff just kind of sings all over in my head, you know. So that's what I'm trying to do. And as I said in the previous question, I don't always know. I don't always know when I sit down to write what's gonna associate. So I mean, I just say, you know, if it's something you're interested in, just, you know, let yourself, you know, bring in things that you might not have thought you could. Like in that Voice Road poem, I say, well, why should we chase a philosopher from poems? Because I always felt in between, you know, the kind of super lyric approach that wouldn't have put the word Heidegger in, you know, anywhere, and the sort of very experimental approach that didn't want any lyricism. So, you know, I what I kind of was trying to do was bring some of that in together. I'm hardly the first person who's done that, but it is one of the things that I'm interested in and hope to do in the work. So thank you for the wonderful question.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. Thanks to everybody who showed up tonight and all your great questions. And thank you both for such a terrific reading tonight. It was really informative. So great to hear you read. So great to hear you talk.